Hey Chris, how's it going?
It's going well, man. Good to talk with you again.
Same here. Can you believe we're into December now?
No, complete denial. Yeah, just matter of fact, no. Although I will say it seems it's not the landing, it's the travel. It felt like September, October, November was light speed. I'm not sure why. But it definitely felt like light speed. How about for you?
That's a good question. I'm starting this December starting differently than it has in the past. And I think it's because in in my like religion, being Catholic, we follow something called Advent that leads up to Christmas,
Hmm.
and it starts this weekend. So my class has been really focused on that the past week, and because of that, it's done a really good job of kind of reframing my view of December this time around, which is really cool. So for me, I don't think September, October, November have flown by for me. I think they felt really slow. And I think December is gonna fly. I think it's gonna fly fast because of the way that like I'm thinking about it. And also I'm really excited to get a break. I'm really excited to step away from the classroom for a couple of weeks and just focus on like home stuff. I know it sounds kind of weird because I get every weekend to do that, but I'm really looking forward to this break.
Yeah, and you can hear it in your voice, and it, we've talked about a couple previous episodes that you've been hit with something. So the little bit of the health thing going on, and it's that idea of recovery, the probably from outside the bubble. I mean, I still come across the conversations where people outside of education will kind of poke the bear a little bit and talk about, well, you folks get 2 weeks off over the winter holiday, and then you get your March break off, and then you get the summer off. And this isn't my first career, so I can remember being that person back in the day, way back working restaurants, and having no real regulated time off, actually having to sort of kind of bite and scratch and fight to try and get time off, because it always seemed like, well, I mean, that's the upswing of a busy restaurant. I mean, there's no downtime. But it is interesting, to sort of think about that that upcoming break. And often, okay, so in the current system as we see it, often it's not just the teachers that need the downtime as well. I mean, you start to see it in the students. There's something about the long November for many students and teachers, that you just know as you creep up to December, you're digging into that, what's just beyond your 40% to get across that finish line, just to drag it across the line. We got to complete. Close. I like to say to some of my students, we're in that zone of, you got to be able to close. Do you got anything left in the bucket just to close in the final minutes of the game?
Well, it brings me okay, two things. I think about two things as you talk about your perspective. The first one is let's go back and break down. We started this podcast a week before school started, and we talked about the preparation involved to start up a new school year
Yeah.
from my perspective and your perspective. Now we're coming to close to mid-year, Christmas break. What does that look like in a school for the people who aren't familiar? For the people who their only experience was when they went to school. So I would love if you and I took a few minutes to break down, to decode December in an elementary school and in a high school, in the system that you participate in,
Mm-hmm.
the infrastructure. The second thing is I go back to those two words that I said in the last episode, mental health.
Yep.
And this year, more than any other year that I can remember, because a teacher's memory is short. You go like year to year and you just put aside things, right? But there's been a lot of focus this year for me in my particular environment about that and around that. And it takes a lot of energy to try to keep people afloat, right? Like for anybody that works with people, they understand the complexity of that interaction back and forth all day, every day. And in teaching, with between like 18 and 30 students. And in high school, it's different. In high school, a teacher can see 3 different groups of kids a day. So, I mean, from an elementary perspective, I feel like I've been working hard to keep a lot of people afloat around just like thinking positive, being positive, trying new things, trying to put aside the stuff, the baggage that comes to school every day with them. Just let's take off your backpack and put it down. And don't worry, I'll let you pick it back up, but put it down. Let me try something new on you. And it's hard. Like that interaction is hard. And I think for me, that's what's really got me tired. And I need to re-energize, and I need to reconsider and reflect on how to start a new year and then go back to keeping people afloat.
Yeah, there's something to that. You mentioning our starting point, starting this podcast right at the beginning of the school year gives a really kind of a cool perspective on not only being able to bounce back and forth our experiences, but just the fact that it started with the school year. So we have this kind of chronology of topics that kind of pop. And I guess if you were new to the podcast or new to teaching, you could have a little bit of a barometer of some of the peaks and valleys, both, some of the stuff that you and I have worked through personally, but also how that feeds into the professional life. Like it's kind of a cool little bit of journaling if someone dared to get into our messiness. There's something funny about that, the last few weeks of August, and going back into how we prep for a school year, because that jargon is bounced around a lot with teachers, right? Like your prep period, you're prepping for a course, prepping students for the future. Like there's so many things that you're setting the stage for. And, you go into a very similar mode in late August, getting ready for the school year. And I sometimes I wonder about so that's intentional. And I'm gonna throw down that probably every teacher, every educator goes into school and goes into school mode at some point late August, definitely by, early September, depending on what your start time is. And I'm still trying to find a really good way to capture a moment like what you and I are in right now, after we've moved through 3 months of the structures that we've set in motion, and kind of lock in what is it that I need to do differently next August. Because it's almost as if whatever you set in motion, like it's so tight in August, and to get everything ready for a full school year, I think one of the biggest challenges, and this decodes it or pushes it outside of the EDU bubble, is how much time do you have to contribute to that prepping? And what are some of the decisions that you sometimes have to make in that prepping, as far as using old resources where we're going to test drive it, maybe I'm going to tweak it on the fly, redesigning entirely? Like, is that something that should take part over the whole summer, or sort of once you get rolling, like you're sort of moving these Lego pieces as you go? And then when do you have the time to kind of say that really worked well or that didn't work well? So the whole prepping for that journey between where you and I started back in September to where we are right now, it's really complex. And we're not even putting in any of the kind of the anarchy of sourcing your sort of change. So like you said, you're supporting other people, you're working with the students, you're talking to parents, you're maybe going to conferences. So my God, it's kaleidoscopic, really, to get to this point. And I really can't say for sure that I've got a handle on specifically what it means to prep for a school year. Like to speak specifically, it's like I can sort of show what I do. Maybe that's pretty explicit enough. But I like how you're saying, sharing that context between what it looks like at elementary as we creep into out of long November into short December, and what that place actually is at elementary and secondary. What are your thoughts, man?
Well, at elementary, you get through November, and when you hit December, a couple of things happen in a Catholic school. There are a lot of celebrations. So I referred to the season of Advent. So there's a lot of like preparation for Christmas in terms of like preparing our minds, our souls, our spirits, and to prepare for Christmas and what that looks like and what that means. And every division, at least in the schools I've worked at, do some kind of weekly um, gathering and reflection. So there's that whole piece, like it's layered on. So I was looking at the Monday morning memo for this coming week, and it's like early years, Advent celebration at this time, juniors this time, intermediates this time, primary this time. Then there are a lot of people who are sick. So it's like there's supply teachers everywhere, or guest teachers has been the consensus. In one of the tweets I was tagged in around the language of teachers who are not the regular teacher. So you got the guest teachers, the occasional teachers in the room. The kids are a little bit rangy because they know what's coming, right? Like, so the teachers are getting them or trying to prepare them from a faith perspective. And the kids are pumped because Christmas is coming. You're going to get 2 weeks off. You're going to get gifts. You're going to get all kinds of wild food for most people. But then you got the kids that aren't going to get any of that for Christmas. And so now you're seeing things coming from them that you may not be prepared for, that may challenge you even more than the regular everyday challenges. And so you've got high excitement, and you've also got high anxiety, and you've got illness spreading through the building, but you've also got this joy that you made it through September, October, November. So when you said that our podcast and the way we've been kind of hitting our work over the past 3 months has been kaleidoscopic, I feel like it's the same thing in elementary school. You put the kaleidoscope to your eye, and as you turn it, the colors change and the visuals change, but there's movement, right? You keep turning it, you keep seeing different things, new things, exciting things. So we're not ramping down yet. We're ramping up. There's a lot going on. Christmas is in the air because now there's decorations all over the place too. Like outside people's classrooms, they kind of, with Advent, they're also spreading the Christmas joy. So they're sharing like art that is connected to the season. My kids made a video recently about Advent. We've got a Christmas tree in it. So to get the tree, we had to bust down a couple of doors and go through some boxes to pull that prop out to use it for the video. And it's really funny because as we were making the video, a couple of my colleagues said, "Hey, where'd you find that?" And I told them. They said, "Good. Don't put it back where you found it because we're pulling it out on Friday to decorate." And so it was kind of funny, again, those layers, right? My kids are in the middle of doing one thing. People see the symbol, the tree, and they're like, "Don't hide that thing because we're going to need it right away." So it's busy, but there's lots of positive celebration. There's lots of putting out fires because some kids don't want to be away for 2 weeks, right? For them, they're dreading that. And then you got this disequilibrium because you've got lots of teachers out because they're not feeling well. And you've got guest teachers in. And I would love to hear the perspective of an occasional teacher. I would love to hear how they feel about December. Do they get excited that they know that they're going to get a lot of work? Or are they also a little bit hesitant because they know it's going to be heavy and the kids may be off? So sorry I took the long way around for that one, but there's a lot going on. There's a positive vibe, but if you look closely, you will see that thin strip of what I want to call negative, of kids who are preparing themselves to be away for 2 weeks when that probably is not very good for them.
You know, I love that what you said, the prep and the soul. There's something when we talk about the spaces, the really interesting spaces between your context and mine, the just the reality that you can have time and speak to so plainly. I loved it so plainly, prep in the soul. Like that's in itself mind-blowing work. Let's say regardless of a classroom context. And to be part of that, or to be a facilitator for that. And even okay, you say prep in the soul and I throw down facilitator. Like I don't even think those words really work together. I'm educationally jargonizing it. But you get into December and I think about you touched on the mental wellness factor that can happen it can happen at any point in our lives. Obviously, it can happen at any point, but there's something about the intensity of having so many individuals in one space, and that shared experience of that one space. You need to be able to speak to mental wellness when that family is so large in one space, one classroom, and you spend a lot of, as you had mentioned, you spend probably more consistent time with the same family at school than I do in my context with, I may have less than 5 students in a school year that I would say I would see for a full semester or for 2 semesters. The other sort of students would be coming in more short term and then going back to their home schools. So starting with that prep in the soul, I love it. I love it just because of the sheer the sheer awesomeness of it. It's something that I would never be able to say, or I would never find myself saying that in the school, but I get it. There's a real kind of power to be able to speak to mental wellness, digital and actual citizenship, our family connections. It's all drawn together with that prep in the soul. I love that when you mentioned that. I also really dig, you've got me thinking about this, the power of scheduling. You've got me thinking about the routine of school and what that looks like for individuals, for whatever reason, start to fall outside of the routine of school. Now we're on the inside speaking to that wellness, so you can sometimes feel lifted and ground down by that exact same routine. I can roll with the guest teacher terminology. I remember that conversation. I kind of put into there, can we just call everybody a teacher or an educator? But if we have to, I guess I kind of like that idea of guest teacher more than sub teacher or whatever other terminology. And then you kind of add to that, what do the routines, you said more the season or this time of year, what does that look like to someone just kind of jumping in? Do they have that same, how do they connect to it? But it makes me also think about the individuals that aren't constantly supported or bound by that routine and schedule. It could be a student taking time away from class for any number of reasons. It could be somebody going on a secondment or moving, to work at board level and then coming back. Those transitions in and out. In my heart, I'm gonna focus. Probably, I focus more on, let's say, the mental wellness and the student connection to that community. But you just got me thinking of, you and I have had a lot of conversations where we speak about the intentionality of moving outside the silo or the bubble. But there's something really interesting is that kind of like your way back, and that you can come back. There's instances around us, I think, where individuals, when they find themselves outside the bubble, that process of coming back can be, I imagine, incredibly challenging. Secondly, depending on the time of year it happens, it can feel like it might be more challenging because of, like you said right now, the routine is pretty intense. And then I flip to, how does the system then say, we got ways of welcoming you back? So it's not just the person like this brute force kind of like pushing their way back in there. How does the system keep that door open or the lights on for them to be able to find their way back in? Wow, you got me thinking a lot of things about that one.
I just had this week a student leave my class. I had a student come to me on Monday and say, my mom says I'm allowed to tell you that I'm going to be leaving this week. I said, where are you going? Vacation? No, I'm going to new school. What? I was
Mm-hmm.
like, and this young person just started at our school in September. And I have to tell you, I was like just thrown for a loop. The whole class community was thrown for a loop. And it's one of those things where the student, they moved at the beginning of November, and now it took them a month to feel the sting of how to get this girl to school every day. It had become a problem. They were going to do it for the year, but they just can't do it. Like, it's not working for their family. The logistics are not working. So she has to leave. And the reason why I'm telling you this is because this is part of the December. As we start our December, our month of December, we already feel like there's damage, right? Like, one of our classroom members left. And I think the timing of the departure is what has caused, because there was a lot of emotion this week around this person leaving, right? Because you spend 3 months with someone, you get to know them really well, they get to know you really well and the community really well, and now they need to go and jump in to a community that's already built, that's already prepared on how they're going to do December, but you're not part of that preparation. So again, I go back to the layers. I go back to the things that happened in elementary school. So this week I lost a student. And I could joke about it and say there's one less person to teach, but I'm really not feeling that. I'm feeling like this person that we invited into the community, that I feel like I did my best to assist the student in feeling good about her new school and her new class. Now she's got to start it over again. And we have nothing to do with her new beginning, right? Like, we don't have any control over whether she feels welcomed or not at her new school. And I say that, and I don't I don't want anybody to take it the wrong way. I'm sure she's going to be welcome with open arms, but my point is that my class and we have no control over how her start goes. And we talked about that because she was close with a couple of students that really needed to make a new friend, right? Like, for them, this girl was a gift from God because she didn't know the community and she was new to everything. And so they could establish a friendship, an authentic one. And they did. And so there was talk this week about what we can do before Christmas break, something we can do, we can send to her at her new school to let her know that part of our preparation for Christmas includes her. She's not been forgotten. She's not been left aside. We know where she is. I can get things to her. I don't know her teacher. Um, I've never heard of him before in our system, which is it's not out of the ordinary, but she's just at the school, like a neighboring Catholic school. So she's not far away geographically, but I don't know her teacher. So it was neat how the kids, because as we've been talking about what we were going to do for December and how we were going to prepare ourselves for Christmas, it was neat that we all rolled her in and said she's not with us anymore, but we're not going to just leave her and her soul on their own. We're going to connect with her this month to make sure she's good from our perspective as best as we can. And that's the life of an elementary school. And at the particular school I work at, to be honest with you, I will not be surprised if I pick up at least 2 new students between now and June. No surprise at all. In fact, I'm mentally prepared for it. And it's funny, I've got the duotangs, and there's always extra duotangs in the buckets. And the kids say, why? Why do we have these leftovers? And I tell them, because Mr. C's pretty sure we will have new members to our community. And they kind of look at you sideways like, no, we won't. I'm like, yeah, we will. And I just don't know when that'll come. But when they do come, I'm mentally prepared. I physically have a place for them to sit, a place for them to make their own resources, to make their own. And so this is just something that works for me as an elementary school teacher in the particular community I'm in. What if I get a new student next week? I'm ready for that. I'm ready to roll them in. I'm ready to contact their last school to find out if there's anything that they want to send to this person to help make December or January a little bit easier to deal with.
Okay, so totally with you there. Your possibility of having new students join you, that I think is you've dipped into my reality quite firmly. And this has been a part of I like to call them small spaces that I've taught in, probably coming up on the last 7 or 8 years. So being a part of alternative education, and now working with students on suspension or expulsion, it's continuous enrollment. That's the EDU jargon, and that quite literally means at any point in my school year, I can get new students. And you made me think. So you said the buckets. So I think now we have the bag of work, and we have the buckets of prep. So you've just trademarked our next baseball cap or our sticker, whatever we start putting on Etsy for the Decoded podcast. So the bag of work and the buckets of prep, because I too operate the same way, and I'm sure many educators do. I mean, you have a couple extra photocopies. You said the duotangs, you got the few extra pencils, and some of my colleagues will even have, so they have their course binder that they have all their courses mapped out in, and then they'll have a binder at the front of the class for when the students are away and they know they can come in and grab the handouts, things like Google Classroom and other cloud-based systems allow students to grab it from home if they want. But that amount of extra pieces that you have just in case, I share that context with you. And for me, in my context, where that can be extended, it goes into a couple different spaces. I'll go back to the prep and the soul, the sort of starting point for your comments. You playing a support role for your student transitioning to their new school, we have started to, in my context, think about that as aftercare. So the students that transition away from us, what sort of resources do we need to kind of put into their backpack that will extend the positivity, the connectivity, some of the counseling conversations that they've had with us, so they can do quick grabs? Are we available for conversation if they need to connect with us still after they've returned to their home school? And we've started also to try and find a way for the counselor that I work with to do continued counseling with some of these individuals. So going and making in a face-to-face contact with them. The challenge is in that regard is that the students that are in class with us also are supported by the counselor and myself. So we're working through what the scheduling looks like. But that whole, how do you extend that connectivity when someone is no longer in front of you? And I really love this type of conversation, because I think it's easy from outside of education to think about As a parent or a caregiver, you want to be connected to the teacher. You want to be connected to the classroom in some way. I do firmly believe that. And I think I've been in conversations where a parent has asked me, the shape of it is, it kind of took you a little time to get back to me, Clef. Like that was a little bit of, it's been 3 or 4 days. And I have a hard time going into the full explanation that, yes, I have a deep connection with your kid, and I do want to provide you with a communication. And if, I don't often put in the middle there, but I'm also reaching out to kids that have transitioned away from me, because that list never gets shorter, right? It just doesn't. And it's almost the thing that sort of pierces the teacher's soul on that is where you have to make the choice. You have to make the choice either for, sometimes personal or professional wellness, that I kind of have I have so much time. I can't spread myself any more thinly. Something has to come off the plate. And when you sort of say, okay, I'm hoping that student can now do it on their own. I'm going to try. I'm going to try it if I have the time to reach out to that child. But the concentration of kids that need the support are right in front of you now. There's a higher number. So you make me think about, again, some of the off ramps and on ramps. Like, how does the system help us do that part of our job? How do we communicate to parents of our current class lists that we're also still kind of supporting other kids that have left our school altogether, or even have moved to another classroom in the school? Backpack, the bag of work, and the bucket of prep. I use those buckets too. For me, they're not buckets. And maybe you're saying buckets just to kind of, thematically speak of them. They're sort of like those white wash bins that you can get from the dollar store. They're kind of rectangular in shape. Yeah. I discovered those this year and I have them in there. It's an easy way for a kid. Okay, dude, I put your handouts in there. You can get rolling on that. Grab it. My friend, grab your other bucket. I have your test. It's sitting there waiting for you. And then, do we call it buckets? Now you got me thinking, what do we even call it?
My
Bin.
ESL.
Sorry. We call it bin. We call it a bin. Grab your bin. There we go.
My ESL kicked in. I didn't, as you said, as you were talking about calling it a bucket, I'm like scrolling through my mind trying to think of the word. And it's like bucket was the first word that came to mind. But you're right. It's a white bin from the dollar store. I've had them forever. That's where we keep our duotangs. You know what? I was really pumped to hear your perspective about kids coming in and coming out, because for a classroom teacher, it's relatively it's not common that, well, we don't get new kids and lose kids like you do, right? Because your whole job is about supporting kids who've been sent away from their home school, right? And will be reintegrated at some point. So for you, that's the normal. For me, it's not normal for a student to say, I'm leaving next week and I'm not coming back. And it's, relatively speaking, not normal to have a kid walk in March and say, here I am. I'm at your school now. I'm in your class now. But for me, at this new school that I'm at, it's it's more normal than other schools for people to come and go. Now, they're not coming and going like they do for you, because your bread and butter is being able to work with students who come and go. I don't know if I could do that.
Yeah, we have found ourselves, my colleague is in many ways, she's so wholehearted in her approach to connecting with the students, to a point where it starts sometimes to refract back, and she just gets swept up in the emotion of, where the connection is lost or the connection isn't working, like so deeply connected to the human experience for her. I found myself saying that being the best signpost possible is our version of best care in this frame. because even with the tools that we've discovered and the tools that we've created and parts of the system that we've kind of cracked open to find out if there's anything left in the jar, so to speak, you know, like you're just taking the spoon and trying to scrape out those last few bits of resources, you're still sometimes found in a place where the being in the moment and doing the best thing that you can while you have the student in front of you is where the work is. And I don't know if she is entirely comfortable with that statement. I think I've grown to become comfortable with that statement because of my work in alt ed as well. But being the best signpost and the most clear signpost to redirect the student, we that continuous enrollment factor can be quite challenging, you know, even connected with curriculum as well. So receiving a student at this point of the year that, so if a student were, let's say, on suspension, the student would be returning to their school potentially, but even leaving their home school at this point of the year, summatives are starting to be introduced, culminating. So your very end might be starting to be introduced. Some of the chatter over if you're going to be working over the winter holiday or the Christmas holiday, here's some stuff that you can be focused on. So it's leaping off a pretty tall bridge, so to speak, you know, and the current that you're kind of landing in can sometimes pull you away a lot faster just because of where all the group work is heading and all the collaborative work is heading. And I really feel for those students, and I feel for all the students, but students in particular at this time of year, I'm really getting, you know, in constant connectivity with their home schools to make sure that I know on the daily and that the home schools know on the daily and that the parents know on the daily the work that they're completing. So I'm moving stuff through Board Courier, taking photos in class and sharing it immediately back with the teacher, and just making sure that everybody has a rung on the daily achievements, because there's still that transition for the student to go back to their home school. And the only thing that I want to have happen for them is for it to be loss of time, not loss of productivity, not loss of connectivity, not loss of rapport, any of those things. So I even encourage the students that are with me to reach out and send emails. And sometimes I have to spend time teaching them how to send professional emails so that they can actually get the clarity, kind of do the job that I'm doing. But it's so much more empowering when they're reaching out and keeping that connection as well. So yeah, keeping them in time. And if a student, let's say at this point, were expelled, so they were on expulsion and they were enrolled directly, then I become the classroom teacher for this student. So then the negotiation around what courses is this student going to participate in? And depending on the prerequisites that they have in their credit counseling summary, and depending on what their interests might be, and depending on my depth of experience. Now, I've taught a lot of different courses that, you know, was a skill set that I developed when I was still back in alt ed, a little bit of that mindset, like, well, I'm going to teach myself almost any course that the space allows. There are some courses that just because of the facilities I cannot do. So when the student arrives and we start working out what courses are going to look like, then we also have to discuss the fact that there's 6 weeks of the semester left. So if I'm picking up a course that they had started, if I can continue it, I will. If it's a course that I can't continue, then we have to talk about what we're going to put in instead. And one of the difficult conversations in that sometimes can be they're having success in a course that I can't support at all. And again, we're back to we have 6 weeks left in the semester. So one of the interesting spaces that sometimes I'm in is discussing, well, we're going to start this curriculum. There isn't enough time to finish or satisfy all the expectations. So we may have to pick the course up again in second semester. And then when you're in second semester, what happens if what happens when they finish those courses early? So there's a whole lot of time shifting, like on your PVR, you know, like, because sometimes putting those courses end to end It's super challenging, super challenging. But you know what? I often talk about it. It's like Sudoku. We'll make it happen, but we're putting it on the table. Like, this decision sets in motion this decision. And there is a perfect square. I will tell you, there is a perfect square. We find it. Sometimes it's line of best fit. Sometimes it actually is a perfect square. And we manage to sort of satisfy all the conditions that the kid needs. But there's a whole lot of courageous conversations in there, and absolute transparency, like just speaking clearly to how we can and can't support, which kind of brings us back to what you were saying. How clearly can we or can't we support a student that's in transition and feel like the system is dancing with us? So a little bit more of my context.
I like it. There's a lot going on there, and I never really get to hear too much about your context, but I feel like I'm building. I've got a foundation of what you do, and every few weeks when we talk, I get a little bit more flavor for the work that you do, the environment that you're in. I didn't know that you were like taking pictures daily, communicating that with the teachers back at the home school that were working on a particular course with a kid. Like, it sounds like you really have to be, you work with the kid and you're blasting things out of the room digitally or manually or whatever, snail mail back to the other school so that people know what kind of progress your student is making or their student is making. Like, it's wild stuff. It's wild. The fact that you have to be able to teach a number of different subjects on the fly, that's also amazing. It takes a certain type of person to be able to be comfortable with that, to have the confidence to get into that role. So I give you 2 thumbs up for being that teacher.
Can I jump in on that?
Yeah,
Sorry.
of course.
Here's where I don't want. So I've had people ask me in the past, and I can see the kind of glint of curiosity in their eye. And this is about the alt ed context, because alt ed context was similar. The only difference is the stuff that I was capturing, how I was assessing digitally or physically, like the pieces of paper, or conversationally, right? I could keep it myself, and that just became the portfolio for the student. As I've moved further along, I'm now asking students to capture their own learning. So I leverage learning blogs and digital portfolios and such. One of the things that is often asked, and I try not to listen too fast, but it's how do you do that? Like, okay, wait, you teach that many different courses possibly in one period, and I really strip it down from any thought like there's somehow magic there. And by stripping it down from magic, I pull it away from something. I need to be able to pull it away from anything special about me. We can have that conversation. I might have the right mindset. I might have, I'm risk tolerant, ambiguity tolerant. I'm okay with change. All these things that just happen to be a part of my personality. But it's really hard. If the more I speak about it that way, the less clear it becomes to someone as to what the nuts and bolts of it is. So I'll throw it down completely. Yes, I have lesson plans. And I think I mentioned before, they look like mind maps. My mind maps are just so I can find stuff again. I got to be honest. I've tried to move almost entirely to digital planning altogether. I have lessons. I have micro lessons. I have suggestions of where I can take a lesson. I'm sitting down with a student. I'm getting up. I'm walking to another student. Once in a while, I have students taking the same courses. Doesn't happen often. I have stuff on paper. I have manipulatives. I have Lego. I have art stuff. We have music. We have video. So I'm going as multimodally as possible, but I'm up and down and up and down and up and down and up and down. That is how those credits get done. That is how I satisfy the how is it personalized, how is it alternative. If you have the stamina, anyone can teach that way. And I could do a lesson on how to be that version of a teacher. I can show that. But I'd like to demystify it just a little bit so that if someone were choosing to be in that space, they would feel supported. They could say, oh, that's how you do that. That's how you do that. Then it's more of a choice to whether or not you kind of want to teach in a space like that. And it's funny because I do come across that conversation frequently, and I've gotten better at demystifying it. The second part, I am never comfortable, never. And I've gotten comfortable with being uncomfortable. It's one of the conditions I think of working in these spaces is that, and it's not. I'm just pushing back on your words. The idea of being comfortable in it. I don't know if I've ever any day ever felt like going in that I was 100% comfortable with where that day was going to go. So yeah, that was a long me jumping in, but just to kind of get those words out. I love how you spiked me there for a second.
Well, I love how you said that you've learned and learning to be comfortable being uncomfortable. I think this is a thread that I've seen in many different areas. It's a it's a common idea in a variety of disciplines for me, because the bottom line is, when you can be this way, when you can be okay knowing that you don't know what's going to happen or that you're not feeling 100% confident, when you're okay with that, it leaves the door open for a lot of different paths that you can take. And it can alleviate a lot of stress and anxiety for you. When you were talking about your work and actually breaking it down, what it looks like, what you do, I thought two things. Number one, I would love, I would love it if you made a short film, a short movie about what it looks like to be you in a classroom. Now, I know you laugh. I would love to be in your room for a week with you, recording you and the work you do and the students you work with. I would love that if somebody said to me, "We're gonna pull you out of your room for a week. You're gonna record some video and audio of Clough." Say, okay, where do I sign up? What time do I leave? Because I don't know. The creative part of me would love to do that. That's the first thing. The second thing is, when you're going to be away from school, how do you plan for the occasional teacher? And
Guest teacher.
whatever, dude. There's so many names for them. Guest teacher, occasional teacher, supply teacher.
Okay.
With my class, no matter what I call them, unfortunately, they tend to act the same way when I'm gone. So the non-Mr. Chidiac teacher, okay, whatever you want to call it, the replacement for Clough or the Clough lookalike, I don't know. But how do you plan for a guest teacher in your room? And do you find that a lot of the same people end up, I don't know how your system works. I don't know how you get guest teachers in your room. In my system, there's a computer that calls teachers. And so there's a roster and the computer goes down the list and then back up again, something like that. I don't know how that works for you, but does it tend to be the same people that come back to your area of work because they're okay with it? Or do you constantly get different people in your room who have never done it before and look at your plans and go with the flow based on that?
Yes to both. There are a few individuals. So there is there's individuals that have supplied in my context when I was in alt ed, and they sort of see that I'm in a different space and they have watched for those jobs, because it's the same thing. It's the computer system. I posted in that I have an absence. I'm going to be at a conference. I'm sick that day, and the job is grabbed. So there is the, if it's not seen by someone that digs that classroom context, then it could be picked up by anybody. But there are individuals that really like working in some of these small spaces and watch for those types of jobs. And even if it's an extended period, they're looking for those types of jobs as well in our board. So they really like, doing community classrooms and special education support classrooms like that. So it's very similar to you. That part is similar. I felt like in some ways, I'm going to just do a side thing, that when I thought you were about to say, and it was a bit of a realization on my end, that you started, when you were listening to my context, I almost thought you're going to say, it sounds a little bit like what it's like to plan for your context. I felt like we got a little bit of a harmony there in some ways because, dude, you're teaching a lot of different courses too, right? So your small classroom style, and it just came to mind. It's often for somebody that I can still see doing kind of like that. Really, I'm just not kind of. I can see it by the look on their face. I'm like, okay, imagine an elementary school classroom with single teacher having to deliver multiple bits of curriculum. That is a little bit. That's a little bit like what I do. And then they kind of back up like, oh, okay, I kind of see it. I said, except at the secondary level. As far as my planning goes, my planning for me, as far as what is like the archival binders, my resources and my planning are I've kind of spoken to, the mind map. I have links, I have stuff, I have planning that sort of is both actual and digital. What I leave behind, and maybe I'll get some snaps this week of it because I don't think I actually brought the binder home. I have my daily binder. So in my daily binder, I have a section for each student, and it's in alpha order. And within each student's section are their daily plans. So the things that each student is working on. I have a kind of a rapport or an affective survey on it, sort of measuring what their sort of like mood is on the day, like how it's sort of changing. I have a spot for me to write my anecdotal notes. Reminders. It looks like a daily chart. Okay, so I do the lessons with the minds on and the learning and then the consolidation, and then I have my daily binder that sort of shows what each kid does. Inside that exact same binder, though, I also have for each kid a slot for data. So it could be, I don't know, it could be that I have their credit counseling summary in there, maybe contact information, and then I also have sections for each of their courses with the resources that they need for the next day, or maybe I've mapped out the next 3 or 4 days. So if you are coming into my context and picking up for the day, you would be able to open up that binder, and there's the indication in there whether or not they have an IEP or whether or not there's a safety plan. So all that stuff that is a part of regular lesson planning, I just, instead of having one binder, here's the 30 handouts for the whole class for the day, I have a section for each child and what their next task is going to be. So then you break it down and you kind of go, I can see you nodding your head a little bit. Then you kind of go, okay, like there isn't the magic of it. It's just I potentially could be planning for 10 different kids, each doing a different course. And you would walk in as the teacher and go, whoa, okay, so this kid's doing grade 9 math, this kid during period 1, and that's across 4 periods. So each kid could be dipping into 4 different courses in that day. So
do you get prep time?
No. And now that is it's an interesting little bit because of my context. I don't have on calls. So it's a little bit like it's the conversation that's worked out between the program that I'm in, the union, and the school board. So often at secondary, you get duties and on calls. So the duty would be, you're doing cafeteria for a full week. So you on one period of your day, sometimes on your lunch, sometimes on your prep period, you would be having to go stand in the cafeteria for 37.5 minutes each day. There's a total number that each educator gets to hit. Depending on your context, you can't get any more on-calls or duties than what our contract allows. So that would be measured on the full school year. And there's a whole balancing system in the background. There's a union representative that checks those numbers. The administrative staff are checking those numbers. So it's push and pull. Because we are our own island to a degree, there's nobody that I would be covering. So I'm not given any duties. So my day starts at 9 a.m. My day ends technically at 2:30 a.m. when the students leave. And around that frame, I'm expected to professionally manage my prep time. So we have a half-hour lunch in the middle of the day. Sometimes I'm prepping stuff up there. I prep at home. I prep whenever I can, right? Or I'm having meetings outside of that. Sometimes we do our intake meetings. So new students, we would do it at 2:30. Sometimes we do it at 8:30. Sometimes I'm driving to a school to grab curriculum because the turnaround is so quick, it's not going to get sent in time. So I'll drive to that home school and I'm like, can I get that novel? Can I get that handout? So.
Okay, so I'm a little confused. I understand
Hmm.
that I understand you don't have duties because it just won't work.
Hmm.
But as an elementary school teacher, I get a certain number of minutes a week for
Hmm.
preparation. And while I'm preparing, my students are getting French. So you do get your prep time. You're just
It's back ended. Like the end of the day, I would be doing it, but I don't have a period in the. I don't have a period that sort of would pop up in the middle of the day where I can sit down and do prep between periods because we go period 1 and 2 with like a 5 minute break in between, 10 minute break, and then we have a half-hour lunch, and then we do period 3, 4. So we have 4 learning periods around a half-hour lunch. So at the end of the day, from 2:30 often till like 3:30 or whatever, I would be doing some prep, but it's not specifically on the books like it would be on a schedule for a teacher in a high school or an elementary school.
you're doing your prep, but you're doing your prep after school.
Yeah,
So you don't get prep time.
not specifically scheduled into my day. No,
And that's okay with everybody involved. Like this is
it
it's
was an it was known. It was part of the handshake coming in that this is the nature of the day. Oh yeah, this wasn't a surprise. This is sort of the way that it works. Part of it is that to have those 4 periods back to back, the intention there is to deregulate students in a lot of ways. So often students, not often, one of the conditions of being on suspension or expulsion is that you can't be on any other school property other than my school. That's it. That's ministry language right there. And secondly, the day is kind of squeezed in a way such that it would reduce the likelihood of you encountering other students at other schools because you're kind of in later and you're out earlier. So there's necessary strategic controls put in place that impact how I do my prep. So, and this
okay.
is I'm good with it, and I'm good with it. I get it done. It works for me. Like I said, usually it's at the end of the day. I could be doing some prep. I could be hustling off to another school to grab some resources. So it works. It works just fine.
I'm
But
happy to
it,
hear that.
yeah, but it is a different context. Yeah, it's a totally different context, and knowing it coming in, I think there's a little bit of a mindset there, and both the union and the school board, as I said, are both both played a part in that agreement that could work.
Very good.
Mhm.
Well, Chris, we've come to the end of our time for today. And I have to tell you, I'm looking at my notes and I don't have a lot of them, this was one of the things I wanted to do with this podcast with you was I did not want to have pages of notes. I wanted to just capture some of the flavor of our talk. And
Mhm.
it's funny because I've got some things written down here that bring a smile to my face. Prepping the soul, buckets of prep, bags of work,
Mhm.
comfortable being uncomfortable. But I like it. I like that we were able to kind of reconnect with the beginnings of the podcast. And I really like that we dedicated this episode, it looks like, to the month of December and what happens during that month before our first major break of the school year. Because we had Thanksgiving,
Mhm.
but it's not a major break, in my opinion. Christmas is a huge one because you're gone for 2 weeks. That's a long time to be out of routine in terms of like the teachers doing their thing at school and the students going to school. So I'm looking forward now to our first podcast after the break to talk about what January feels like after being away for 2 weeks. I'm looking
Uh-huh.
forward to that in a way. But I'm also looking forward to connecting with you over the break.
I was gonna say, I
Uh,
was just, are we gonna still, if we can, you want to try talking over the break too?
I would love to because
Okay.
I would love two things. I would love to capture what that looks like for an educator who's doesn't have to get up and go to school. What parts of what no, really because what parts of school are still up here in your mind while you're on break? What parts of school have you put aside for some time? Like I don't want to I don't want to like talk about it right now because I don't want people to get how I deal with it until we get there. But
Mhm.
not for some people, it's not just turn off the lights, close the door, and that's it. It's over until you turn them on again and open the door again. It's not like that for a lot of people. Um, but anyway, well, I'll tell you a quick story before we go, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
So years ago, my wife and I went on a cruise. It was a wedding anniversary gift to ourselves to go on a cruise over March break. 10th year wedding anniversary. We're going on a cruise over March break. Leading up to March break, I had three kids who had done a psychoeducational assessment, and their reports were provided to me the week before March break. So I said to the parents, listen, this is going to be a busy week, and I'm going to be gone for March break, so I won't be doing any school stuff because I'm going to be away. And I said to them, is it okay? Will you make me a photocopy of the report so I can read it on the way to my vacation? Because I'm going to be in an airport, I'm going to be on a plane. My wife is good if I take that time to do the work. And I don't want to do it on the flight back because I'm going to be tired. I want to get home and see my kids. I'm going to have to prepare to get back into work mode. And it was funny. They looked at me and they're like, you want to read this report on the airplane to your cruise? I said, yeah. And they're like, are you crazy? I said, no, but the report's in and I want to read it. And I've got three of them to read, which is really weird that you'd have three kids at the same time with the reports ready at the same time by three different psychologists, not all the same, not all with the school board, all privately done. They're like, yeah, of course, we'll make you a copy. You can do whatever you want with the copy. We'll make you a copy. And it was just funny because they were like, what do you mean you're going to work? I'm like, well, if I were here, I would read it over the break. I would start to prepare my mind for the recommendations and what I can do as a classroom teacher to help the child get to success or to feel better about being at school or whatever the case is. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I guess a little preview of how I operate when I'm not at school. And I read them on the plane. I read one in the airport and then I read two on the flight. And it was great because I was highlighting stuff. And then when we got to where we were going, I just packed them away. And I knew that I had done what I needed to do. And now it was time to enjoy my week with my wife on our trip. And so for me, that balance works, and it worked. I didn't want to delay that stuff for a whole week and then come back to, because when you come back from a break, it's a beast because you have to remind the kids about all kinds of routines. You got to remind kids that we're not at home anymore. And it's tough for everybody, or it can be for the first couple of days. And I wouldn't have had the time or the energy to read it then. So I just wanted to throw that out there as a little flavor for, that's kind of my vibe. Not everybody's like that, and that's cool. Everybody can do what works for them.
I love it. You got me thinking about how I'm going to think about, and so I guess here's the homework. Thinking about bridging those gaps. And we're not talking about the summer. I think the summer is kind of like the big one. They can be summer, but what about the shorter gaps? What about March break? What about March break? Okay, so it could be any break, but what about March break? What about the Christmas or this winter break? And what are the steps that we take to maintain the connectivity? And that's a perfect example, dude, of you sort of, doing some light reading on the plane. And, we come into a season like this, especially I still got to come back to, if we're prepping the soul moving through December, and we're watching for wellness. And if it's in my context, we're looking at safety and security and sort of wholehearted connection when the students are away from us for 2 weeks in contexts that can be very different than the safety and the connection and the love of our school, right? That's a reality. I'm curious about, what educators are doing. What do they do? How do they extend out just to sort of offer support, protective elements, still maintaining that relationship so that it's a useful resource while the students are away from us for 2 weeks, but also allows for a nice tether to bring them back to the classroom again when we get them back in January and that new year. So new year, but not necessarily, so new that you're still sort of spinning out into space. You feel like we can get back into that frame of supportive and caring learning structures. So
I love how I call it Christmas break and you call it winter break.
I don't know what to call it, to be truthful. Here's where I get really twisted up, to be honest, is that despite your context and my, let's say, non-religious context, I'll throw down right now, there are other cultural and religious holidays that occur around this time that I always like to challenge the thinking, saying, you know what, that is a beautiful Christmas tree. And I do appreciate the season of Advent. Who else can we make sure we're honoring in this season? So I don't know what the neutral language is. I wish I could go through the full list of everyone that gets to enjoy the celebration of this season. I am not smart enough to include them all, but it is the work that I try and do, still trying to find them all.
And I appreciate that. And the homework. I thought we were going to get away without any homework, but
it's honest work. Yeah, it's reflective homework, let's say.
Right on. You can drop the homework, Chris. I like that.
Okay.
And I do appreciate what you said about there are other people celebrating other things, and it's important to honor them. I totally agree. But my context, and I'm going to stand by my context and my faith. But that's not to say that I'm not open to everybody else's celebrations. I'm more than happy to acknowledge them and to engage them. But like you said, I come from a particular context, and that's where I'm coming from. And you know what? Maybe for me, the homework is to figure out what else is going on this season. Maybe I need to open my eyes, right? Like, who else is celebrating what? And me being aware of that is important, because then I can grow as a person. I can grow as an educator, because there's nothing worse than not knowing about something and judging it, or just being unaware and like neglecting. I don't want to be that person. But it is a season, right? We are going through something at this time, many of us, and it impacts teachers, learners, parents, community members. So thanks again for another great chat. And God willing, we will be connecting again next week. Have a good one.
You too, buddy. Take care.
You too.